kind of got ahead of myself there. All right. Our new quarterly is from Egypt to Canaan. And I'm going to read an introduction to the quarterly here, and that I thought was pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and read it. Think back for a minute, or for a moment. Do you remember how Jacob, or Israel, and his family moved to Egypt during the 7 years of famine? Do you remember the beautiful story of how God worked throughout the lifetime of Joseph, overcoming all odds in good times and bad? You know, we studied that here a couple of quarterlies ago, at how Joseph was sold into Egypt. That was under a rule of a friendly Pharaoh who welcomed Joseph's family into Egypt. Now fast forward several generations. The 70 souls that entered Egypt under the rule of the friendly Pharaoh all died, and their descendants have now multiplied immensely. The land was filled with them. Some around 400 years, a new Pharaoh that is anything but friendly is now in charge. He is fearful that the Israelites would join forces with Egypt's enemies and fight against Egypt if Egypt ever came under attack. Therefore, this Pharaoh begins to afflict and restrain the Israelites in an effort to keep them from multiplying. That was his first thing, was to put restraint and afflictions upon them. The lesson here that we're going to throughout the quarterly is Satan is not a friendly taskmaster. Yes, he may seem friendly at first. Well, the first Pharaoh seemed friendly. He was friendly to Joseph, but as time went on, that changes from friendly to being a horrible taskmaster. God uses Israel's flight in Egypt to teach how Satan brings the bondage of sin upon those under his control. And that is absolutely right. The more that you are associated with Satan, the harder it is to get relief from Satan. However, God always provides a way of escape. Watch for the way God works in each lesson to accomplish his purpose of delivering his people from bondage. So let's keep our eyes open on that and see what happens. The verse that they kind of pulled out for the whole quarterly is 1 Corinthians 10 and 11. Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our ammunition, unto whom the ends of the earth are come. And so let's kind of keep that in mind, that the things that happened in the Old Testament is an example of things to come. Or it might relate to our life. It might relate to one thing or another. It might be a type. It might be a shadow. It might be there's things that happen. Everything that God allows to happen has a purpose, and so we need to keep that in mind. Also, I'm going to read this. This quarterly, we will begin following the Israelites as they travel, leave Egypt, headed to their promised homeland, Canaan. This was hundreds of years. Yes, more than 1,000 before Jesus came to this earth. It was more than 1,000 years, but yet it reflects on what Jesus did for us in a shadow, in a type and shadow there. Jesus would use these as types of the church. They lived there many years and multiplied to large numbers. But now Joseph and his friendly Pharaoh had died. Our lessons open with a new Pharaoh who seems to know nothing of the true and living God. In fact, he himself is a type of Satan, determined to keep God's chosen people in bondage. So let's keep that in mind. Let's also remember the verse that I was talking about, the one the verse for the whole quarter of being examples there. That verse is talking about the very time we will be studying when the Israelites traveled from Egypt to Canaan. These things are examples from which we are to learn. When we read of the Israelites, we can learn in two ways. Number one, we can learn to imitate their good deeds and avoid their sins. And then number two, we can learn what the church is like. Israel, a short name for the descendants of Jacob, and we learned that in one of the previous lessons, that God changed Jacob's name to Israel. We remember that. Him being a type of, or the people, the descendants, being a type of the church. That is, the things that happen to them are examples or types of what would happen to the church later when Jesus Christ came then. So that's kind of an introduction to the quarterly, and that we're going to be studying for the next 3 months. And so kind of wanted to lay that down, give you kind of the background of that. The title of our lesson today is Israel Enslaved in Egypt. And the memory verse for today is John 8:34. Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. You know, John was probably the youngest disciple that Jesus had. But John talked more on love than I think any of the other disciples. He also talked more on sin than I think about any other disciple, it seemed to me like. John wanted people to know what really sin was. And you know, we have to know what sin is in order to know that we need to get rid of it. And that's what's important, and that's kind of what John is telling us here. That Jesus said these words, but John was the one that recorded them. And you know, if Jesus said these words, then he wants us to know what sin is. He wants us to know that there is a solution for sin, and that's Him. And we want to keep that in the forefront of our mind there. I'm going to read the emphasis there. I'm going to actually read the adult emphasis this time. The selling of Joseph into Egypt had started a chain of events which brought his father Jacob, also named Israel, and all his descendants to Egypt, where they settled in the land of Goshen. And if you'll remember, we studied that a couple of quarterlies ago. At first, the Pharaoh and the Egyptians were friendly, and the Israelites enjoyed favorable conditions. Satan makes things look great at once. I'm adding this to the thing. But Satan makes things look great at first. At first, he makes things look good. And then the longer you follow him, the worse it gets. You know, Pharaoh brought Israel and the descendants all to the land of Goshen, which was good, you know. Well, he died, and another one came, and he died, and another one came, and he died, and they forgot all about Joseph's dream of what brought them down there. And you know, they're just a foreign people out there, and that's what they kind of looked at them as. And you know, we as Christians, We are foreign people in this world. I think we studied that last Sunday. We are a foreign people in this world, and so it's going to be hard to have friends with the people of the world. We'll have friends with one another, but we can still show ourselves friendly to the people of the world. As the years passed, a new king or Pharaoh came into the power, and then things changed. And so that's where we're picking up now, starting with Exodus 1 and 7. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased. I didn't read the emphasis. Oh, yes, I just got through reading the emphasis. I'm sorry. Okay, the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was full with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto the people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel have more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when they falleth out of war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so give them up out of the land. So the changes has come to Israel, to the Israelites. A big change has come. It's come over a period of 400 years. Or about that. And so it's something that started out, it was wonderful. And as time went, they become under bondage because of it. The children of Israel increased abundantly, and the land was filled with them. At first, the Egyptians were friendly to them. However, the friendly king, who had been kind and died, and another Pharaoh became king of Egypt. He saw the Israelites were many and strong. He saw that they were many and strong. He was afraid they might fight against Egypt and leave the country. Then they would not work for the Egyptians anymore. He wanted to keep them from doing this. This new Pharaoh knew not Joseph, and how he interpreted the dreams, as I have already mentioned, and Joseph's uprightness, his power with God, and his wisdom in handling national affairs. If you'll remember, he was in charge of keeping the grain for those 7 good years, remember? And then when the 7 lean years, they had food down there because they was prepared for it. All because of God leading Joseph into what he was led into. And Joseph will tell you the same thing. It was God that interpreted that dream and all. They are now in bondage as servants and slaves. This is a type of the bondage of sin, and this is what that is a type of, is a bondage of sin. If you will remember, when you was in sin, Christian now, you were in sin, think back how much bondage that was. Think about it. I'm sure each and every one of you can think about how that bondage, how that weight of sin was so terrible upon us until finally, and I'd say most of us had to hit rock bottom. Hit rock, or we thought was rock bottom, and it woke us up. There's got to be something better than that, and that's when God gets a hold of us then. Okay, let's go to verse 11. Therefore they did set over them taskmakers to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities. Help me out here. Pithom and Ramses. Okay. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. Now see, that was Pharaoh's first choice of cutting down the population, was to put afflictions and burdens upon them. And they were grieved because of the children, let's go to verse 12 there. Let's reread that. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and to make their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service within they made them serve was with rigor. There was no lazy people around. They had to do their job. They probably had to do more than their job. I mean, you know, when they say rigor there, you know, that's tense, hard work. Or that's the way I look at it as. Tense, hard work. And you know, there wasn't people wanting to, hey, I only want to work a 4-day week or anything like that. No, you get to work. You're working 7 days a week, and if we can get eight days a week out of you, we're going to do that. You know, and you know, it was something fierce that was on there. Think about when we were in sin, how fierce it was for us too. Hard work as slaves. The new Pharaoh's first plan was to set over them taskmakers, men to oversee the work of the Israelites. And these men were men that cracked the whip. I mean, they had no mercy for no one. It didn't make any difference whether you're a man or a woman or a child or whatever. Teenager, it didn't make any difference. But they afflicted them with burdens there. In addition, they were to afflict them with their burdens to make them suffer. Why? To kill some of them off. To kill some of them off. They made them serve with rigor, work very hard. The Israelites built cities. They worked in the fields. You know, some of them was making mortar, as is mentioned in the scripture there, making mortar, making brick, and one thing and the other. And then, of course, there was others that was out in the field, and you know, probably were farmers, and probably grew wheat. And of course, that straw was used then to make the mortar, and one thing and another. And so, you know, work. Isn't that what Satan wants us to always do? Work, you know, for him. And to be a taskmaster, or to be someone over them, making slaves out of them is what they were doing. The Israelites built cities. They worked in the field. Their lives were bitter with hard bondage. They were slaves, and they could not do as they wished, but only as they were told. Isn't that Satan too? You know, Paul mentions that in one of his writings. What he wanted to do, he couldn't do. And what he knew was right, he couldn't do that. But then what he didn't want to do, that's what he exactly did. Well, that's exactly what Satan will do to us, you know. And this is what they had to do. Continue in that bitter bondage. Nevertheless, the plan did not work. Still the Israelites multiplied and grew. But you know, God was with them. God was with them. God was with them. You know, God knows what's going on. We might get into a predicament or a trial or a temptation, and you know, we might think that, where is God? You know, where is he? Well, think about what Job thought. You know, Job says, I think he writes in one of his scriptures there, in one of the scriptures there in Job, he says, I don't know where God is, but God knows where I am. And you know, we can always stand on that promise. Why? Because God cares about us. You know, in one place in the Bible it says that even the hairs of our head are numbered. God knows exactly. God knows exactly how many hairs on our head. And so, you know, He knows where we're at. Sometimes He will allow us and to go through some temptations and things just to show us, to allow us to know how strong we are. Allow us to know. God knows how strong we are. God knows what we can take. But He's putting that test to us. How are we measuring up to that test? That's what's most important. The best thing to do is keep our eyes on Jesus. If we can't see Jesus, then we better pray and have the Holy Spirit to lead us in all things, wherever it might be. I may not know where Jesus is at, but Jesus knows where I'm at. That's one thing we can always put our trust in there. And that's the same way with these people. They were enslaved. A lot of them died still being enslaved. There was lots of them that died still being in slavery. I think it was like 400 or 430 years or something like that before they from the time that they were brought to Egypt to the time they left Egypt. So, you know, 430 years, that's longer than what the United States has been a country. You know, you would think back, oh my, you know, back in George Washington's time, that's a long time ago. But, you know, it was a long time ago, 250 years maybe, something like that. But just think, this was 400 years. So that's another 150 years, you know. And so, but you know, God never gives up. God's promises is always true. That's right. You know, Jesus promised that He's coming back to get His church. Coming back to get the church. And who was expecting it? Who's the first people that were expecting it? The disciples, don't you think? The apostles. I think Paul writes in a letter that he was expecting it because he says, we that remain, he's talking about him, we that remain will be caught up with him. So I think he was expecting it, but it didn't happen. And you know, people down through the years, 2,000 years. But you know, we know one thing. It's closer now than it was back in Paul's time. It's closer now than it was yesterday. And so we need to keep that promise in the forefront of our minds. Just like this, God knows where we're at. God knows, God promises and makes promises, and He will never not fulfill a promise. It may not be in our lifetime. If He didn't say He was going to fulfill the promise in our lifetime, we might think it's going to be in our lifetime, but we know one thing, it will take place. Let's go to verse 15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah. Okay. And the name of the other? Puah. And he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Egyptian women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God. There was still fear of God in the land. Do you get that? These two women here, at least these two women, they feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. Thank God for two women that wouldn't obey what the king had proposed there. You know, usually when God uses people, He does not use a majority of people. You know, if we remember, Daniel was kind of stood by himself. Sometimes there was 3 Hebrew children that stood with him, so them 4. But they were still way in the minority of the rest of the people that was there that came from the same land that they came from, you know, and was taught the same things. But yet, you know, God worked through people. And you know, sometimes we might think that we are few in number, you know, but God can use us. Whether it's just me, God can use me. If it's just you, God will use you too. He won't just use me and not use you, but He'll use you too. And you know, if we got to keep our eyes on Jesus though, and keep thinking, doing what He wants us to do. They were told to kill the baby boys. Pharaoh's next plan was to kill the Israelite boy babies that were born. He ordered the midwives or nurses to do this. However, they feared God. That's one thing that I want to instill in your mind today more than anything. Being able to fear God. Being able to fear God and not be scared of God, but to have an awe for God in that. They were, and that's what these 2 women did. They had an awe for God, not like they're scared of God. That's not what they were, but they had a reverence for God. They were Israelites, descendants of Abraham, and they knew God. You know, even in this foreign land, probably working 7 days a week. And you know, God told them to only work 6 days. But they were forced to work 7 days, probably. But still, they had time to train up their offspring and let them know what God really expected of them. They took it all the way back to Jacob or Israel. Took it all the way back to Isaac. Took it all the way back to Abraham, you know. And said, that's our descendant right there. Descendant, forefathers. That's our forefather. We're the descendants then, is what they were saying. But that's our forefather. That's who God had the promise with. Him. And his descendants, which includes us, is what they were saying there. Yeah. They were Israelites, descendants of Abraham, and they knew God. They knew it would be wrong to kill the babies, and they did not. Therefore, Pharaoh's second plan failed also. They knew it would be wrong to kill the babies. Don't you wish America knew that too?
Yeah, what's talking about here sounds an awful lot like partial birth abortion.
Right.
It was wrong back then, still wrong today.
Yep. They knew it was wrong to kill them babies. And you know, God hasn't changed.
No.
God hasn't changed. It's just as wrong today as it was back then. If only America would wake up and see that. How many babies has been killed? You know, I've heard numbers up to 60 million people. You know, 60 million babies. Well, you know, then you think Hitler 6 million. Well, that's 10 times what Hitler done. You know, so you know, God knows what's going on.
Yes, He does.
God knows what's going on. We know what's right. And let's keep our eyes on what is right there. Told to cast the boys in the river. That was the third plan then. Pharaoh had another plan. If the midwives would not kill the babies, maybe the rest of the people would. He ordered them to cast into the river every son born. How terrible. How terrible. It doesn't make any difference. You know, it says in the Bible, I think one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. That's pretty easy to understand, isn't it? Thou shalt not kill. But look at the amount of killing that's going on today. Not only with babies, but also one with another. Maybe two men had a conflict with one another, and one shoots the other. And or it's even in families. Maybe a father, I think there was a trial just this week of a father that killed his wife and a son. Why? Why? Because Satan has a hold of them.
Absolutely.
That's what it is, because Satan has a hold of them. And we might think, I could never do something like that. Young people think, I could never do nothing like that. I can follow Satan and I'd never do nothing like that. Well, think back. They probably thought the same thing. I could never do nothing like that, but yet they did. That's what Satan does to a person when that happens. Satan is at work, and Satan will drag us to the very bottom and try to keep us there. That song I was brought out of the deep miry clay. If you're hung up in deep miry clay, it's awful hard to get out of that. But Jesus is able to get us out of that, and let's remember that at all times there. We were talking about he ordered them to cast in the river every son born. How terrible. What will happen? Will Pharaoh's third plan succeed? The one throwing them into the river? And it goes on and says, we shall see. Remember, the first plan was bondage. Remember that today as we studied. The first plan was to cut down the population was through bondage, working hard and doing those kind of things. The next was to abort the baby, more or less, to kill the baby as it was being born. That didn't work because of two righteous ladies. The next was to cast them into the sea. Well, okay, we'll see what happens there then. Let's go to our memory verse there. Jesus answered them, verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. I know it's not in your quarterly, but it's the memory verse that was written there. Whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. Them two ladies, them two midwives, they did not want to be a servant of sin. And so therefore, they did not do, even the king told them to do it, they rebelled against the king. I think them two ladies was probably a lot like the three Hebrew children. If it meant death to me, so be it. Isn't that what the three Hebrew children told the king? He says, but have it known or have it written down that we're not going to serve what you want us to serve, this God. God will take care of us. He's able to deliver us from this fiery furnace. But if He don't, He's going to take care of us anyway. And that's an encouragement to us, If we meet a situation like that, we can be assured that God's going to take care of us one way or another. If it's not here literally, it'll be there spiritually. And, that's what we're working for anyway. Don't worry about the people that can kill your body, but be concerned about who can kill body and soul. That's what's most important. Okay, Jesus answered them, verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. Sin is like slavery. Jesus says that whosoever committeth sin, whoever sins, is the servant of sin. Sinners are not free. You know, you see them out there and they think they can do whatever they want to. You know, they think that they're just free as a bird. And wake them up some early morning on Sunday morning and they've got a hangover and they're in pain and I'm never going to do this again on a weekend again, you know. And then what happens? Next weekend, they're right back in where they was at. Sin binds them. It makes them do things they should not or really do not want to do. That's what sin does. Do you want to do things that you don't really want to do? I don't want to do that. If that happens, you're bound. You're bound. Sin forms habits that are very, very hard to break. And they do. You know, we can see that in habits that can be taken up. Smoking, drinking, gambling, things like that. And I have talked to smokers, several smokers, that they want to get off of smoking, and it's hard to get off. Some of them has whipped it. Some of them has whipped it by cold turkey. And, you know, and I'll ask them years later, do you miss not smoking? I can't think of a one of them that answered any different way than, no, I don't miss it at all. I feel better. And yes, they've also said, I'll catch myself reaching in my pocket for a cigarette, not even wanting it, you know, just reaching. Oh yeah, that's right, I've given that up, you know. But they've said that before. It's a habit. It's a habit that's hard to break. And you know, if a person can break it on their own, that's great. But you know, God can help you with that too. And that's God. He can fix it to where you get saved, lay them down, and go out, and you're free of it. Not all people can do that, but God can work it that way. God's able. I'm just thankful. You know, I've never smoked, I've never drank, and I'm thankful for that. I'm glad I didn't have to worry about that, you know. But you know, sometimes you might be tempted with smoking and drinking. I can't say that I have never been tempted with smoking and drinking. But you know, I know that if I do, then that would probably be the last of me, you know. So, you know, Satan is there trying to trip us up at all times. Sin brings trouble. Do you like trouble? Well, you want to stay away from sin. Sorrow? You want to stay away from that then too. Death? I'm talking about spiritual death here. And we don't want that either. You know, we might be looking forward to literal death, which that's not what this is talking about. You know, we can look forward to literal death because we know we got a place waiting for us in heaven. But you know, this is what it's talking about here is spiritual death. And you know, there's no hope after spiritual death. There's no hope there. So when you die literally in spiritual death, let me clarify that. Then there's no hope then after that. Sinners are slaves. Satan is their master. As the Israelites were slaved in Egypt under Pharaoh, so sinners are slave in sin under Satan. Israel's slavery is a type of slavery in sin. Israel's slavery was material. Their taskmasters, the bricks, the fields, so on and so forth, etc., could be seen and touched. A sinner's slavery is spiritual. It cannot be seen. John 8:36 says, "If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed."
Amen.
And you know, that's the hope right there. I don't care how low a person is in sin, how far Satan has dragged you into that pig wallow. Jesus can clean you up and set you on the right track. That is what's most important there. You know, our soul is more important to us than anything else in our life. You know, I mentioned, I heard something say, what is your most valuable possession? I heard that mentioned somewhere, and I asked the wife, I says, what's your most valuable possession? And before she could even answer, I said, salvation from sin is our most coveted, can I say coveted? Possession is salvation. That's our prized possession, is salvation. And it's, you know, it says thou shalt not covet, but if you covet salvation, is that wrong? I don't think that's wrong. If you covet salvation, I don't really think that's wrong. I think probably I'm using the wrong word in that. But, you know, that's our desire, is salvation. And, you know, we want to guard that. You know, if a person has a prized possession, they want to guard that.
Sure do.
They want to hang on to it. That's so important. And, you know, that's the way it is with salvation there. National and world conditions are such that we or our children may be called upon to face similar or more frightening crises than was Israel. How much does the strength to meet the crisis then depend on what we are doing now? Are we building a strong fear of God and trust in Him by our communion with and obedience to Him? Only I can answer for myself. Only you can answer for yourself that question right there. Let's be as strong. Let's put our full trust in God. Be strong in Jesus, in obedience, reading the Bible, coming to church, being associated. Learn as much as we can. Are we passing on to our children the teachings, trainings, and examples that will build such in them? And you know, most of us have already raised our children. But you know, there's still sometimes a question maybe come from that child that's 40 years old. You know, well, we still are parenting them children. You know, I lost my father when I was about 60, better than 60 years old. But you know, he still had wisdom that I craved, even me being 60 years old. We can still learn from our parents. And so it's very important. Let's don't just say, oh, well, you're 40 years old now, you're grown up, and you know, you're out on your own. Yeah, they're pretty much that way, but you know, when a question comes, we're still here, and we can still do the things that God calls on for us to do. And so it's very important. Our lesson next week is the birth of Moses. And so we'll go into that and see what happens from there then. Amen.